Welcome in to Stop the Takes, football podcast focused on getting back to just talking ball. I'm Dakota, that is Austin, and today we wrap up our NFL draft review episodes with the NFC West. We've gone through the North, the East, and the South. We just wrapped up the AFC West, and now it's the NFC West.
Every
Before we
division.
kick this one off, yeah, we did it.
We did
We
it.
did it. Before we kick this one off, I'll say at the top of the show, like anybody, like, share, subscribe, appreciate all that. Anybody who's tuned in to any of these videos, really appreciate all that support. Feel free to go back and comment on any of them, whether it's your favorite team or a division, whatever. Go back. We love reading those comments, so appreciate any and all the support. Without further ado, let's dive in with the San Francisco 49ers, a team that was picking a lot higher than people would have projected at the beginning of the season as a team coming off of a deep playoff run the year prior and a roster that felt like still one of the best in the NFL. They pick at 11 and they take Mykel Williams, edge rusher out of Georgia. What were your thoughts on that, Austin?
A bit surprised that they had Mykel Williams ranked above some of the other edges in the draft class, but it was definitely a position of need. They needed a guy rushing from the other side outside of Nick Bosa, and they got that in Mykel Williams. He's slated to start right away, and he was a good player. I just thought 11 was a little high for Mykel, but it was also, like we've been talking about with this edge class, man, a lot of these guys at the top had question marks. And Mykel's question mark is that he just hasn't been the most productive pass rusher yet. He's been a really good run defender, which is going to add value immediately, but we'll see if he can develop as a pass rusher. It's going to help that you have an elite guy like Nick Bosa rushing on the other side. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think he did not have very many single-digit sack total for his career. A very good run defender, kind of in the Shamar Stewart-esque, but not even quite as good of an athlete as Shamar Stewart is at his size. But a guy who is, a stout run defender. But to your point, they needed to add depth on that defensive line. They need somebody to help out. It was kind of becoming, the phrase we use, Nick Bosa and friends a bit. After a team that invested heavily in the defensive line for multiple years in a row, when they added DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead, Nick Bosa, and then even when they drafted Javon Kinlaw. So it was time to revisit that pool and add some depth to the defensive line. And yeah, surprised that they didn't have other guys ahead of him, but this position they needed to attack, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan must have liked him, so they get him in the building. And they continue that into the second round with Alfred Collins, defensive tackle out of Texas. So continue to add to that defensive line in the second round.
And they did as well in the fourth round with CJ West. So They loaded up They loaded up at D-line, which I think was kind of the theme of this draft. They really wanted to rebuild the defense in particular. I guess they feel pretty good where they are on offense, which I kind of agree with that. I mean, the defense was kind of depleted after losing several guys in free agency. And that defensive line, like you said, it really was just Nick Bosa and everyone else. So bringing in Alfred Collins and CJ West, I liked honestly both those players. Alfred Collins was a bit of a consensus reach, I would say.
Yeah.
But was a solid player in college, and so was CJ West. So just adding depth, and I think everyone again is kind of trying to model the Eagles, man, and that's what the Niners are trying to do here as well. And I think Alfred Collins will probably play sooner rather than later, probably end up being a starter at some point. So now you've added two new starters to that defensive line in Mykel and Alfred Collins. So.
Yeah, Alfred, an absolute monster at 6'6", 332. A little bit lower production, but not bad at Texas. And then CJ West is another guys, a ton of guys in this draft that were 4-year guys somewhere else, transfer somewhere for their last season. He went from Kent State to Indiana to play on the playoff team this past season, was a big part of that. And very athletic for his size, 6'1", 316, and ran a 4.95, and had a 33-inch vertical as well. So two big pieces to add to that defensive line alongside Mykel Williams. So love the process of adding more depth. And to your point, that was the focal point of, I think, this draft for them. And they continue with defensive pieces with Nick Martin, linebacker at Oklahoma State in the third round, and Upton Stout, corner out of Western Kentucky in the third as well.
Yeah, Stout was a bit of a reach, I would say. Nick Martin is interesting. He's actually slated to start right now on our lads.
Yeah.
So it just kind of speaks to when you're getting starting linebackers in the third round, the depth on this team has been depleted, man. This is a team just a couple years ago that was considered one of, if not the best roster in the NFL. And it's unfortunate because the roster's now depleted and their rookie contract cheat code is coming to an end, right? Brock Purdy needs to be paid very, very soon. And that's going to be just kind of interesting to watch over the next few years to how, if their depth gets even more depleted because they can't pay more and more guys. They did just pay George Kittle, so they've got him back and re-signed. But this is a team that needs to start drafting well again, Dakota. They've had a couple drafts in a row now where they just haven't really hit on a lot of guys. So they need to start drafting well again, because really in the beginning of John Lynch's tenure there, that's kind of was what he was doing. He was hitting on, later round guys like, for some reason breaking on his name, Fred Warner. He got in the second round, I believe. That was kind of his thing. He was doing really good in the draft, but over the last few years, they just haven't been as good in the draft, and that needs to change, man. Or it's gonna be tough quick, because with having to pay Brock Purdy, man, they're not gonna be able to pay like these big time free agents like they were in the past. So
yeah, the roster's in an interesting state, and they trade Deebo Samuel, which I kind of like that process anyway. You got your time out of him, you signed him to a deal. Receivers come and go. I think it made sense, especially after drafting Ricky Pearsall last year, and Brandon Ayuk has looked great. I know there's rumors of trading him as well. But on that note, they didn't take Jordan Watkins, the other receiver out of Ole Miss. So Trey Harris went to the Chargers. Jordan Watkins goes here to the 49ers in the 4th round. Very athletic dude, ran 4.37, a little bit smaller frame. It's interesting because a lot of their receivers, I feel like, are a lot smaller. Juwan is kind of the one big dude they've got. And they did add Jacob Coing last year. Forget about that. So, adding some depth to that wide receiver room. And then also with Jordan James. One thing that the 49ers and John Lynch have done a fantastic job on, late round running backs who become productive.
Yeah, that's very true. They have hit on late round running backs, but they still have the investment in Christian McCaffrey. Who knows how many years he has left? Again, especially like when his contract becomes due, you have to pay Brock Purdy. Like you're not going to be able to keep everybody, and that's part of the reason why they traded Deebo, like you said, but also because he had just become less productive over the last few years. So the Niners are just a team to watch, man, because unfortunately it feels like they kind of missed their Super Bowl window at this point. But who knows? Maybe they can start hitting again on some of these guys in the draft. It's also interesting they took Curtis Work in the 7th round, a team that just recently hit on a 7th round quarterback. I thought that was an interesting pick. Good developmental guy, very productive his last year at Indiana. Led Indiana to the college football playoff, which was extremely impressive. So yeah, I thought the draft was interesting. They drafted in volume, which is usually a pretty good strategy, but they just need to start hitting on some of these guys, man, because otherwise the depth on this team is just not where it used to be.
Yeah, it really isn't. And then, with Curtis Work, another one of those 6-year guys with the COVID stuff, that started at Ohio and then transferred to Indiana this past season, and to your point, led them to the playoff. Didn't have a ton of production prior to that. He kind of broke out in his 6th year, which is always something is interesting to see and how you project that. But he did also play through a torn ACL this past season and had surgery on it, so who knows if he'll be available immediately. Makes it tough, too, for the camp stuff of, like, do you really want to cut the guy? Maybe they throw him on IR that you just drafted. But an interesting guy to bring into that quarterback room that did nail a 7th-round draft pick quarterback already that you now need to pay. Unfortunately, you don't have to pay them a lot immediately, but when they become your quarterback, the payment comes due, and they're still paid like a top quarterback in the NFL. A couple other guys they got: Marcus Sigel, a safety out of Kansas State; Connor Colby, guard out of Iowa; and Junior Burgeon, wide receiver out of Montana. So a handful of depth and developmental guys to add to this roster that needed revamped a little bit.
Big time.
Which is looking in a very different, status than it was couple years ago. But to your point, their window it may have shrunk. So we'll see what they are next season. UDFA wise, just have to point out one, John Campbell Jr. from Tennessee. He will not be making the roster. Just going to let you know that.
Yeah, he won't be. He will not be playing for the 49ers. They do seem like they're Vols though. They like to pick up Vols. Just high level with this draft. I am kind of curious why they didn't attack offensive line more. And I get it. They were focusing on the defensive side of the ball. But, man, this offensive line, again, has been depleted as far as just depth and starters are concerned. And Trent Williams is getting up there, man. So he's not going to be around forever. This offensive line was one of the – honestly, it's not been great outside of Trent Williams the last few years already. And, again, he's getting older and older. So – I expect at some point for them to start investing in this O-line. Clearly, their thought process this year was they need to focus on D-line. So we'll see how that works out. But, yeah, again, a team that needs to start revamping and start getting more stars in there to replace some of the older guys and the guys that have already left.
Yeah, I agree with that. Only drafting a guy in the 7th round, a bit surprising with how many picks they did have to not invest on the offensive line more, especially after hitting on Dominic Pooney last year in the 3rd round, who becomes a solid starter. So would have been surprised to see them not take a shot, at least on those middle rounds, on somebody that could potentially earn a job as well like that. So, all right. Well, now to Renee Bugner, guy on Twitter, takes kind of the top 20, 25. So analysts, guys around the league that do draft grades and kind of throws them into a consensus, into a GPA scaling, and then kind of ranks those. So we've been utilizing that for all the other drafts. Where did the 49ers fall on his consensus?
They're at 27th, man. So people consensus-wise didn't like it. I think they just took some consensus reaches, frankly. And it's I don't know, did we do favorite pick? Are we throwing out a favorite pick for the Niners?
Yeah, let's do the favorite pick, yeah.
Favorite pick, I'm going to go CJ West in the, I think 4th round. So I thought he was good value at that point. And again, a team that needs defensive line depth, and I think he will be a part of that rotation early.
I'm going to go Jordan James in the 5th, just buying into the belief that when Kyle Shanahan gets a late round running back, he's going to turn him into something. He's just the king of doing that. And with Christian McCaffrey's age and whatnot, I think adding some depth there like that after letting Elijah Mitchell, go in free agency was a good move there, and good value in the 5th round.
Agreed.
And consensus wise, I think it's interesting because usually teams that draft in volume get immediately kind of bumped up, but I think it was consensus reaches kind of pushed them down that a bit. That is the 49ers 2025 class, which moves us on to the Arizona Cardinals. Another really interesting team at pick 16, middle of the 1st, dead smack in the middle. The team that felt like they could go in any direction, but defensive line, I think, was the main thing. They were mocked Ja'Day Barron a good bit as well. But they end up going Walter Nolan, defensive tackle out of Ole Miss at 16th overall.
Yeah, I mean, love the pick. I think they needed to go D-line, and Walter Nolan is a guy for some people was a top 10 kind of talent. And he had some off the field attitude questions that maybe prevented him getting drafted higher. But one of the best defensive linemen in this draft for a team that really needed defensive line help, as you've said. And they have attacked it. They attacked it in free agency. They've also attacked it in the draft with Walter Nolan. So one of the better, I would say, first round players or first round picks. And I got to also, and I know we're about to get into it, but I also got to say, getting Will Johnson in the 2nd round. I mean, one of my favorite picks in the entire draft, man. Will Johnson, also, again, a guy that some people would consider a top 10 player in this draft as far as talent. And getting that in the 2nd round, I get he has injury question marks and whatnot, but those first 2 picks, man, those guys could potentially completely change this Cardinals defense.
Yeah, I love the Walter Nolan pick. I actually, in our mock, had where we did what we would do. I took him at 11 for the 49ers. Love him as a pick. have to just share a little anecdotal thing on him that's just interesting is that he started at IMG Academy down in Florida and actually transferred to Powell. It's like right down the road from us. I did a little, internshipy coaching stint there. And he ended up coming, I think, literally like right after I had left there. But he's now noted for being from Powell, Tennessee, which is just interesting. But love the pick. Cardinals put effort into the defensive line. They signed a handful of the defense in general, but they signed a couple guys, but needed to invest more. Their defense was not very good last year. They needed to revamp it. And I think Walter Nolan is a great piece for that. He's a good run defender and he's incredibly productive. Can pass rush. He can do it all. Another one of those guys that when he left Texas A&M looked better.
Yeah.
So he goes to Ole Miss for one season and just looks great. And he was the number 1 overall recruit as well when he came out of high school. So got the pedigree behind him there. But loved that pick. And then, you touched on Will Johnson in the second round. Knee injury concerns, whatever. Just love Will Johnson. I mean, watching his tape, watching him, he is just an elite caliber corner who has a tendency to kind of, his ball skills and anticipation are one of his biggest strengths, but it gets him into trouble just a little bit where he tries to jump routes or read things a bit, but he is just so good. And if his knee injury, the concern was basically that he has kind of a concern in his knee that could potentially limit how long he can play. A thing that has been found in other guys that went on to have solid careers. So it's nothing that will definitely prevent him from having a long career. But that was, I think, one of the biggest concerns. Also came off of a different injury with having a foot injury in the season, but was a pivotal piece in Michigan's championship run in 2023.
Yeah, no question about it, man. And again, Walter Nolan and Will Johnson could completely change this defense. You got 2 elite players, in my opinion, at 2 incredibly important positions on the defense. And Will Johnson has the potential to become like a lockdown cornerback, man. That's his upside. He is a potential lockdown corner. And it was just great consensus value. I mean, how many mocks did you see have him drop out of the first round, dude? Not many. And
Yeah.
again, like you said, the injury concerns, it's not as concerning like a guy like Benjamin Morrison who has a hip concern, which is extremely important for corners. Like knee injuries in this day and age just aren't as critical to people's long-term health because it just so many great things with modern medicine and how people recover and things of that nature. So I think Will Johnson will be fine, man. I think they found themselves a really good player in the second round, which is just phenomenal value. They're also pairing Walter Nolan with last year's first round pick and Robinson last year. So this defensive line all of a sudden is just looking better. They also brought back Calais Campbell after all the years. They were the team that originally drafted Calais Campbell, and Calais Campbell still being productive in the NFL. So that's also fascinating. I just like the way they've attacked this defense. It's also notable that their head coach has coached their team in a way that they've kind of outperformed their talent in a lot of ways. So, which is just fascinating to see. If you give him talent, if you give him a guy like Walter Nolan and you give him a guy like Will Johnson, will they be able to kind of take another step on defense? Going to be interesting.
Yeah, and it is. Yeah, to be honest, it's kind of, looking back, a lot of people, even I, with the Jonathan Gannon video when he first started and
the
was
introductory press conference.
Who took the bus here? That thing too with the team, and it was just so awkward. But yeah, I completely agree. I think they definitely played above what their roster was, especially defensively, and that's where his specialty comes in at the defensive coordinator side. And he made that defense better than it was probably one of the worst defenses on paper in the entire NFL. And they outperformed that. So now him getting 2 guys like this in the building, I think could change things drastically for them. Will Johnson's comp by Lance Zierlein is also a really interesting one. It's JC Horn, who just got paid. If he becomes JC Horn for them as a second round pick, who JC was like 8th overall, that is incredible value for that. So this team's been desperate for kind of a number 1 corner as well since Patrick Peterson. They've kind of needed a guy like that. So absolutely loved both of these picks, and they could change the defense completely. But they didn't stop there.
Nope.
To your point at the top, they continued. They then go Jordan Birch, edge out of Oregon, adding defensive tackle, and then attacking edge again after Darius Robinson last year. Pretty athletic dude, pretty productive in college. Another one of those. Was at a team for 3 years, transferred to Oregon to finish his career, and was really productive with them. And then they also go with Cody Simon, back-to-back Ohio State guys. Cody Simon, linebacker, who I think when I was looking at this, he's already plugged in to be second string there. And then Denzel Burke, corner out of Ohio State, who was a top recruit that, again, you look at mock drafts, talk about this all the time. 2 years ago, he was probably mocked in like the top 15.
Yeah, man. A few interesting players there, especially Birch. I mean, Birch had 10 sacks in 2024. Really good number, obviously. So, man, it's just they continue to attack the defensive line and the defense in general, dude. I think that defensive unit could be one of the most improved units in the NFL next season. I really believe that with this draft. Obviously, some of these guys have to hit. It's never a guarantee. It's all just a projection. But I think the way they attacked it, the guys they got, when they got them, I think this defense could be a very much improved unit. And just like the X factor, what we just talked about, Jonathan Gannon, a head coach, he's coached bad talent to look better than it has. So if you give him good players, what can he do with this defense?
Yeah, absolutely. And these guys are every single one of these defensive guys are guys who could go in and at minimum fill in depth needs immediately. But potentially compete. And Denzel Burke's a really interesting one because he was a solid recruit. Was also a freshman All-American. He just kind of never put it together from there. So getting him late like they did. Also worth noting, completely forgot, they also got Josh Sweat. That was the other big signing that they made. So completely overhauling the front seven of this team. And then in the 6th round, they add some depth along the offensive line with Hayden Connor, guard from Texas, and then hit defense again with Kitten Crawford out of safety out of Nevada. So with their 7 picks, 6 of them are on the defensive side of the ball. They clearly knew they had an issue there.
Yeah, clear theme. It also tells me that they like where their offense is at. Which is interesting. But remember, they got Marvin Harrison in the building last year. Wasn't as good as we thought he would be. And Kyler is just like, he's a solid quarterback. I mean, but they have their franchise guy, even though he's not elite. So I kind of understand why they attacked the defense over the offense, because even just how they performed last year in many games, Kyler and the offense would keep them in it, but the defense would let them down in the last minute of the game or whatever. So I get why they attacked defense, and it was a clear theme, and I think it'll pay off, man. I really do. So
I agree. I think offensively, I'm a little surprised that they didn't take some positions more. Their offensive line is also still kind of in a rough situation. Definitely could have used more help there. Also surprised they didn't take a wide receiver.
Yeah.
They're one of those teams that like people started to say, hey, just because, similar to the Panthers, just because you took a wide receiver 1st round last year doesn't mean you can't this year.
Correct.
So I'm a little surprised there because the receiver core is okay.
Yeah.
Kyler could use some more help there.
Yeah, I agree. I like Michael Wilson. He's actually been a solid player.
Yeah.
But I don't like seeing Zay Jones listed as a starter. I mean, that's the kind of guy that you just want to knock down a depth chart, even though he's been okay. Like, he's not been great in the NFL. They're really heavily relying on Marvin Harrison's development, which is a bit of a risk, man, because even though he was a really, really good prospect, was the consensus #1 wide receiver in a year where this is one of the most loaded wide receiver classes last season. So, but I just, again, you're heavily reliant on that, and that's kind of putting your eggs all in one basket. And I would have liked to see them take at least a wide receiver in the draft. It is a little bit surprising that they just completely neglected the position. But like maybe they've seen Marvin Harrison in the offseason. They think he's going to take that next step. And they did need to attack defense, and they got really good value on the defensive side of the ball. So I kind of understand it from that perspective.
Yeah, as far as they didn't try to do some more trading down and pick up more picks to then be able to add more pieces to a roster that does need help. But yeah, the defense should be much improved. Offense, maybe kind of the same. Not much change going on there. But Yeah, from a UDFA perspective, got to shut out another UFL. They also got Josh Fryer, tackle at Ohio State, the other tackle from Ohio State. I think it's like the entire offensive line getting being gone. But they signed defensive lineman Elijah Simmons, big old dude for the middle of the defensive line. Well, he's short and stocky. That's what we'll say.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see him making the roster. Again,
Yeah.
a team that still needs defensive line help, but they've attacked it pretty heavily. So who knows if he'll make the team or not, but it is interesting to see.
Favorite pick? I know what yours is, so I'll take the other one.
Yeah, it's obviously Will Johnson. I mean, it's just I'm shocked that he lasted to that spot, man. My Colts had a chance to take him. I'm pretty devastated they didn't. I thought it's just as soon as he fell to the second round, he was like right up there with probably even ahead of this guy, but right there with Luther Burden as guys where I'm like, okay, and Mike Green even that I'm like, wow, they're still here. They're some of the best value left in the second round. So got to go Will Johnson. He could become an elite shutdown corner in the second round. Love it.
Yeah, I literally didn't see him in dropping out of first round mocks until like the day of and day before the draft when DJ did it. But everybody else, it was like by pick 22, usually he was gone. So him being available there was crazy. I'm going to go Walter Nolan. I'm a big Walter Nolan fan. I would have taken him 11th overall for the 49ers on their D-line, and I like the fit here. Let him learn from Calais Campbell too. Cardinals legend is back in the building, and let Walter Nolan get coached up by him. I love that.
No better guy to learn from, to be honest. Calais Campbell knows how to do it. Possible Hall of Famer, kind of fringe Hall of Famer, I would say. So great player to learn behind.
Fantastic character guy too. Probably one of the best just people in the NFL.
That's a good point, man. That could help a guy like Walter Nolan who's had character questions, more so just attitude questions, and no better professional to learn behind than Calais Campbell. So love it.
Walter Payton, Man of the Year guy. Exactly. All right, what does the consensus say about the Cardinals draft?
They are at 14th overall in the NFL. So just above average draft. I would agree with that, man. I think if other teams didn't have such loaded classes, that the Cardinals would have been one of the best. And I just think they had great consensus value. And for a team that didn't pick a lot, I think it says a lot that they are ranked 14th.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, to be honest. I think it's one of the ones I disagree on a little bit. I probably would have had them higher personally. I'm probably for the fact I'm a Walter Nolan fan and we both love Will Johnson. But again, I think not in this year. That's probably at minimum a top 8 draft class, in my opinion. Yeah. All right. That is the Cardinals 2025 class, which moves us on to the Los Angeles Rams. So they trade down. They decide let's get some more draft capital. And they were the team that traded down with the Giants, who moved back into the first round to take. They traded back with the Falcons. Yeah, They moved back with the Falcons and picked up an extra first, which I love and
huge
helps with their draft. But they moved down to pick 46, so they moved back 20 spots. And they take Terrence Ferguson, tight end out of Oregon.
Yeah, it's hard not to give them a ton of credit for the pick they didn't make, which is the first round pick, getting a extra first round pick out of that for next year's draft. For a draft that was more about the depth of it and not the high end talent of it, I love trading back in that kind of situation. So it's going to be interesting to see where that pick is next year. And listen, the Falcons aren't guaranteed to be a good team. It's really, dependent on Michael Penix. So that could end up being a pretty high pick for them. And then Terrence Ferguson, I guess I was a little surprised to see this being their first player that they take off the board, especially with some of the talent left. I mean, we were just talking about Will Johnson. Will Johnson was available in the slot. But they did.
With the next pick.
Exactly, with the very next pick. I mean, I could see Terrence Ferguson making an impact on the team. Tyler Higbee is just like kind of one of those, solid starting tight ends that don't make a huge difference on the team, like just a solid NFL starter. So Terrence Ferguson could come in and compete for that starting position.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was a position that people wanted to mock them a lot in the first round. And honestly, it makes me kind of wonder, if the Colston, Loveland, Tyler Warren didn't happen as high, would they have probably taken one of them at that pick and not traded back? So the board kind of fell the way it did. They clearly wanted to attack tight end, and all the mocks were pushing that. It is interesting that they take him there versus some of the other options, but wanted to fill a hole that they've kind of had on the roster for a minute with Tyler Higbee kind of coming and going from a health perspective. Very athletic tight end, 4.63 speed at a 6'5", 247, Terrence Ferguson. Adds some, over the middle threat, seam threat for Matt Stafford. So do like the fit there for him. And then they go with the defensive side of the ball in the third round, and they go Josiah Stewart, edge out of Michigan, a guy that a lot of people, another one of those guys I feel like kind of split a little bit on, but pretty productive guy at Michigan. Transferred from Coastal Carolina and was part of the national championship team and had a pretty solid season for them and was a piece to that. So they add him alongside what is already, a pretty solid defensive line.
Yeah, no doubt. It is a solid defensive line that they've been kind of rebuilding ever since losing Aaron Donald. They've been attacking it heavily, but he was really productive at Michigan. He's kind of hard to evaluate because that defensive line in general was extremely productive. Mm-hmm. But 27.7 pass rush win rate and a 92.3 overall PFF grade in 2024. That's really, really good numbers. So again, another one of these edges that I'm a little bit surprised go so low. I would say because I think Josiah Stewart was probably worthy of around a second round pick. So I think it's overall good value. And just really love what the Rams have been doing on this defensive line. Obviously, it helps that they hit massively in Jared Verse. Like Jared Verse was, probably like around most people's third edge rusher last year. A lot of people had the Alabama cat ahead of him last year, who for some reason Dallas Turner ahead of him last year. It's on the consensus. But they hit massively in Jared Verse. Byron Young, BFL, has been pretty productive since getting into the league. So adding Josiah Stewart to this edge trio is pretty solid, I think, in the third round.
Absolutely. And then they also add Ty Hamilton. We'll skip ahead a little bit in the fifth round, defensive tackle out of Ohio State. So continuing to add even more depth across that defensive line that now they signed Poona Ford as well. So they've got Braden Fisk. And most of these guys they've literally drafted within the last 2 or 3 seasons.
Yep.
Of Braden Fisk. They signed Poona Ford, but they drafted Kobe Turner. They drafted Byron Young. And they just drafted Josiah Stewart. And then they also drafted Jared Verse. So absolutely ridiculous what they've been able to build. And Jared Verse, we're talking 2025 draft, but I just have to share my thoughts there of the fact that classic, let's overthink this, of a guy who was an absolute dominant beast as a sophomore. And just because they don't progress linearly into their junior year, we overthink it and then they fall. It's Derwin James all over again from Florida State as well. And they went like almost at the same pick as well. Both ended up being already 1 year in. I think it's enough to say Jared Verse is going to be a really good NFL football player.
Yeah, no doubt.
Pairing,
no doubt, man.
Yeah, pairing Josiah and Ty alongside all of those other guys makes this defensive line look ridiculous.
It really does. I mean, all of a sudden, it's looking like one of the better defensive lines in the NFL. Obviously, dependent on some of these young guys continuing to develop because Braden Fisk didn't get off to the best start his rookie year, but obviously Jared Verse, defensive rookie of the year, he's going to be phenomenal, and see how Josiah Stewart fits into that. But I love them continuing to attack it, saying, hey, we're not content with what we have, because I mean, it's not necessarily a need, right? But they thought, let's continue to attack it with depth. So I like it.
Yeah, and then they attack in between those guys. They went Jarquez Hunter again. This running back class of pick what you wanted. Interesting guy. Was all SEC second team in 23 and first team in 24. So pretty productive running back. Averaged over 5.7 yards per carry pretty much every season. Or over 5 yards, 5.7, 6.4 the past 2. But has been a pretty productive running back. Also decent in the passing game, which fits really well with McVay's offense, and Matt Stafford loves his running backs out of the backfield. So like adding him to this offense as well, to go alongside Kyron Williams and Blake Corum, because Blake Corum's a very different running back that they drafted last year. So they got 3 solid running backs now to rotate through with different skill sets.
Yeah, they have a solid running back room at this point. Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, a team that I don't think had to take running back. But again, like you said, adding a different skill set, so I like it.
And then they take this is hilarious. Chris Paul Jr., linebacker at Ole Miss, but on NFL Draft Tracker, I guess he goes by a nickname, and it's Pooh, Pooh, like Winnie the Pooh. So his name is Pooh Paul Jr.
Interesting. I did not know
Yeah.
that until you just
I
told
didn't
me.
either. I saw it and I was like, "Who is this?" And then I was like, "Wait a minute, that's Chris Paul Jr." So, like this pick as well, a guy that I think could have gone higher. Another one
Yeah.
of those 3 years at a team. Transfer guys was at Arkansas for 3 years. Transfers to Ole Miss within the conference. Ran a 4.63 at 6'1", 222. Not like the most athletic guy, but was pretty productive at both schools. So like that piece in the 5th round of a guy who could compete for a job.
Yeah, like you said, I think his athleticism profile probably is what made him fall a little bit.
Yeah.
Because he was one of the more productive linebackers in this class, and a guy I think that could end up starting for the Rams at some point. So getting that in the 5th, I think I like that value.
Absolutely. And then they wrap things up with Kanata Mumfield out of Pitt, wide receiver, developmental guy, maybe more of a special teamers, to be honest, but wasn't overly productive or athletic, but adding some more pieces to that. Decent contested catch rate, though, so he adds that to that wide receiver room. That did just lose Cooper Kupp, but added Devontae Adams. So
fascinating wide receiver room,
yeah.
man.
It's one of those that I'm looking at and a little surprised they didn't invest slightly sooner. Obviously, Puka, they nailed in the 5th round, and he's kind of the franchise guy. Devontae, they signed to an interesting deal, a 2-year deal worth a good amount of money. So they still definitely think he's going to be Devontae. Jordan Whittingham out of last year, the 6th rounder, who also developed pretty well. And then Tutu Atwell, 2nd rounder, hasn't really lived up to 2nd round hype. So surprised they didn't invest a little bit sooner, just adding a little bit more depth there at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I think honestly they are set at that position this season. But like you said, I mean, Devontae's a little bit older, so like it's a 2-year deal, so you're not like set there long term. Even though Puka is the guy, and they could have used a 3rd option, so they could have attacked wide receiver. But I think their offense is fine. I think they wanted to load up more on the D line, and like you said, get a tight end in there to compete for that starting job. So I get it from that perspective.
Yep. And then UDFA wise, the one and only Willie Lampkin. Interior offensive lineman in North Carolina. Dude's so undersized, 5'11", 291, but he was really good at the Senior Bowl. He held his own against a lot of guys that were drafted pretty high. To be honest, looking at their depth chart and stuff too,
he has a chance,
could compete. Man. Yeah, I mean, he could compete. They just signed Coleman Shelton to be their center, and Kevin Dotson at the other guard position. They traded for. I don't know. He has a path to make this roster as an undrafted free agent and potentially try to compete for starting job next
definitely
year.
One of the best undrafted free agents in the class, Willie Lampkin, a guy who I definitely expected to get drafted, especially in a kind of weaker interior offensive lineman class. But it could easily be one of those situations where they get him in camp and he starts just winning blocks, right? He starts just being a baller and actually playing well. And they realize, okay, he's going to be our guy. Like, he's going to start because he just looks better in practice than everyone else. I could easily see that being the case. And getting that in an undrafted free agent is obviously extremely valuable. If you get a guy that's on the 53 as a UDFA, it's a valuable, but let alone a potential starter. So love that pick up for them.
Absolutely. And then before we do favorite pick, one thing I want to note is I cannot remember which team we were talking about, but we've talked about kind of a soft reset. Maybe in the Steelers, to be honest. I think it was the Steelers where you're not like tanking by any means, but you make some moves that set you up to kind of reset things a little bit. It's almost like that, rebuild but not rebuild thing. But I think the Rams are in perfect position for that now. They have 2 first-round picks next year. Matt Stafford's up there. That could be their path to getting their quarterback. Because a lot of people wanted to give them a quarterback in this class. Even some people, even in the first round, but they don't take one at all. And now have 10 picks next year. with 4 in the first 3 rounds. So I think they're in a solid position to address the QB position this next draft and continue to build this roster up.
It is going to be, it's interesting, man, because they've set themselves up for the future, but they also can win now. They're one of the best teams in the NFC, so they really are set up. They're set up for the future, and they're set up to win now, which is a great position to be in.
Exactly. That's why I call it a soft reset, because quarterback position is just so impactful. But like, if you can keep this roster together, soft at the QB position, take a chance next year, and maybe able to just kind of hand the reins over, it could be effective. So we'll see. What was your favorite pick for the Rams?
I'm gonna go Josiah Stewart in the 3rd round, man. Love that value there. Really productive college player, and I think he'll find a spot in this Rams defense.
I'm gonna go Chris Paul Jr. Not a great athlete, but the dude was just so productive. Like, linebackers can find their home. You like to see the production at that position, so I think he could find his way into a role on this team sooner rather than later. Who's kind of needed some help at linebacker for a minute now. All right, what does the consensus say about the Rams?
17th, tied for 17th in the NFL. I think that's about right. About solid average in the league. And it's average on a curve because I think they had a really good draft. It's just everyone's having good drafts for the most part. And I think people are giving them credit rightfully for the trade back, and they deserve credit for that, because that pick is, going to be really valuable next year. Whether the Falcons are good or not, but if they're bad, then that pick could be extremely valuable. And like you said, it could potentially lead to them getting their franchise quarterback in the future. When Matt Stafford decides to hang it up. So I love it.
Yeah, because even to your point, like with not knowing where the Falcons may end up, but if you have 2 first-round picks next year and you need to trade up for a quarterback, you're now fully equipped to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. That is the Rams 2025 class. So that moves us on to the last team of all of our draft review.
The last one.
They did it. We did it. It is the Seattle Seahawks. I'm going to go ahead and preface this one by saying we will probably not touch on some of these guys a ton, just because they have a huge class and some really interesting guys at the top here. So they do what Schneider said he would never do.
Yeah.
And what we'll give Sam Monson at Check the Mic credit for, because he wanted this pick so bad. They take Gray Zabel, tackle, but they'll play him at guard out of North Dakota State, 18th overall.
Yeah, just talking about the Check the Mic guys, Steve's told Sam they'll never do it, man. They will never do it because, like you said, the GM said they would never do it, and they did it, man. And honestly, I totally get it, because their interior of their offensive line was so bad. And it's also, you have to take into account that they just signed Sam Darnold, and Sam Darnold, when his interior of his offensive line was bad, he basically folded. Whenever the offensive line play was bad for the Jets or even the Vikings at points last year, Darnold's play just got much, much worse. So it totally makes sense that after signing a guy like Darnold, you want to beef up the interior of that offensive line with Gray Zabel. And he was one of the best guards in the class, man. You could argue that his profile was cleaner than Tyler Booker, and Tyler Booker was taken, 6 spots ahead of him. So I thought it was solid value compared to how the rest of the league was attacking offensive line in the draft. And also, literally the biggest position of need for the Seahawks.
Yeah, I agree completely. Dude is huge to be bumped. He played tackle primarily at North Dakota State, but then when he went to the Senior Bowl, he bumped inside and basically just shifted every snap between center, left guard, and right guard and dominated at each one. So the questions, people who are like, oh, we just drafted a guard from North Dakota State. The guy proved it at the Senior Bowl that he can hold up against the best of the best and looked elite doing it. So production score-wise from the next-gen stat stuff, he's number 1 from a production perspective and number 3 from athleticism. So to your point, cleaner profile than Tyler Booker. I think one of the only things that probably knocks him is just being at North Dakota State. But I absolutely love the pick. They needed to address their offensive line. And to your point, the last time we saw Sam Darnold after having an MVP caliber season, in all seriousness, it was him getting torn apart by the Rams defensive line we just talked about. They absolutely wrecked him. So you've got to protect him for Sam Darnold to not be seeing ghosts out there again and to get the Vikings version of him. So love the pick of Gray Zabel there at 18th overall.
Yeah, I agree, man, with everything you said, because you have to take into account what your quarterback strengths are, and they've neglected this position for so long, and it's honestly kind of backfired on them in many ways. So just shoring it up by getting a guy that's likely going to become just a solid NFL starter. I like it, man.
Love it. And then in the second round, they traded up. So they actually traded up to take who, in my opinion, is just a Seahawk. Like, you look at this dude and you're like, that is a Seahawk. And they take Nick Emenwari, South Carolina safety, who earned a ton of hype leading up to the draft after running a 4.38 40. Dude, 6'3", 220 doing that. He just looks like a Legion of Boom guy.
Dude is a freak, man. Dude is a freak. It totally makes sense why they would go after this guy, considering their history and everything. And is a guy that's honestly solid value for where they picked him as well. I mean, people had this guy going at the end of the first round in many mocks. Like, I had him going to the Ravens a few times in a couple mocks I did at the end of the first round. So getting him in the second round, I thought was really solid value. And like you said, man, he just looks like a Legion of Boom kind of player. Shout out to the old Legion of Boom. But so, yeah, I thought that was really good value in the second.
Yeah, super insane athlete, 43-inch vertical. And, for Mike McDonald, I think he can kind of become Kyle Hamilton-esque, right? When he was with Baltimore as their defense coordinator, another tall safety that's super athletic. You can play him near the line of scrimmage. You can drop him back and let him do a true free. So much you can do with him, and fascinated to see what McDonald does with him in that defense for Seattle. They double up in the second. They had 2 second-round picks from the DK Metcalf trade, and they use one of the others on Elijah Aroro, tight end out of Miami, another position that, another team like the Rams that was mocked the tight end pretty often, and they take one who was kind of definitively like the most athletic tight end in this class.
Yeah, and tight end's an interesting position because your college production doesn't matter as much as a tight end. It usually the bigger athletic guys end up being more successful in the league. So that's a position where I understand taking a less productive guy and a more athletic player. In the second round, is it a little bit of a reach? I would say yes, but again, it makes sense to take that big athletic tight end in round 2, and could again come in and play for the Seahawks at some point. Right now, of course, behind Noah Fant. He's listed behind AJ Barner on the depth chart in our lads. I don't think that'll hold up. I think Aurora will take his spot pretty quickly. But again, I like taking a chance on that. Load Darnold up with weapons, man. That's a guy that is, one of the more fascinating storylines going into next year is Sam Darnold, and like, can he continue what he did last year? But either way, he showed last year that you need to load him up with weapons, dude. He's a guy that needs to have as much offensive talent around him as possible. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because honestly, I was just looking, and Noah Fant is honestly younger than I thought he was. Still, he's only 27. He'll turn 28 this season. But guys, the first round pick, hasn't been fantastic at any point. So at least makes sense to attack that position. And with Darnold coming from Minnesota, to your point, where you had the best receiver in the NFL, one of the best number 2s in Jordan Addison, and one of the best tight ends in TJ Hawkinson. I think there's a combination of the skill set around him and Kevin O'Connell's just QB whispering that makes the fit for him in Seattle very interesting, and with a very different, weapons around him, because you got rid of kind of the best one that was there for him.
Yeah.
And DK, you immediately trade him away.
They did.
And then they get Cooper Kupp.
But
yeah. But they did immediately trade away their best receiver. So
it's going to be interesting, dude. That, like I said, it's one of the more fascinating storylines because this is a good roster. But Darnold has question marks, man. And I think it's not the best receiving core in the world. But, Jackson Smith and Jigba has started to develop and has become a really good player.
Yes, he can be the number 1 now.
And Cooper Kupp has something left. He's not like he's not, completely old and washed up. And as we'll talk about in the draft, they also continue to attack receiver in the draft as well. So I think they're so far in the offseason doing right by Darnold.
Yeah, I think so. And we'll see how it all plays out with these extra pieces that they add with Elijah Roro. Yeah, I was also just comparing, which was just blowing my mind a little bit, that Noah Fant is 4 years younger than Cooper Kupp, which is just interesting.
Wow. Yeah, that is
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. That was blowing my mind a little bit. So now when talking quarterback position, this is where one of the more interesting picks happened. Third round pick 92. They take quarterback Jalen Milroe out of Alabama.
Yep, Jalen Milroe out of Alabama. It's fascinating because our Tennessee Vols honestly maybe single-handedly dropped his draft stock because he had his worst game in his college career against the Vols. But a guy who is extremely athletic, is an elite runner. He can bring something to the Seattle offense right now. He's not going to start at quarterback, but as far as designed run plays, goal line carries, things of that nature, Jalen Milroe can make an impact immediately for the Seahawks. He also has one of the best arms in the class, dude. Outside of Cam Ward, he might have had the second best arm talent in the entire draft class. So a guy that is interesting because he has the tools and was inconsistent as far as passing is concerned at the college level. But taking a guy like that in the third round makes so much more sense than in the first round, man. Taking a guy who has the tools, has the upside, is extremely athletic, can run in the third round just makes more sense to me than taking a chance on that in the first round. Because I mean, Jalen Milroe was invited to the draft, man. There was rumbling saying, okay, he could potentially go to the Seahawks in the first round or go to the Steelers in the first round because he has all those tools. But instead, you get that guy to sit behind Darnold in the third round, which I just think that makes so much more sense for Milroe and his development.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. He's an interesting prospect because of how much you're leaning on his athleticism and needing him to grow as a passer, which we know really well historically. Guys, the outliers that have happened recently have caused the evaluation on the quarterback position to change pretty drastically. I think where people started taking shots more because Josh Allen and Lamar were completely anomalies when it comes to a guy who somebody who has athleticism or have the physical traits, and then they develop the accuracy and all that later on. Everybody wants to have the next Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson now, and it's just not likely. But if you draft them and let them sit and have the ability to develop, then there's way more opportunity there. Crazily enough, for the next gen thing, he actually graded at a 99 on athleticism score. He's quite literally like the peak of athleticism at the quarterback position. And what's just very interesting is that his, comp by Lance Zierlein was Cordell Stewart, which is funny because of the conversation that happened with the Check the Mic guys where Lance Zierlein, this is probably why he asked, but was basically like, with a guy like Jalen Miller, you touched on the packages for him. How many years do you give a guy like that? And this is an off-season topic, but how many years do you give a guy like that before you try them at another position? How much time do you try to develop him at quarterback before you say your athleticism can't be wasted anymore and we're going to throw you in at wide receiver or something?
It is very I also think he could play running back, man. He has such good running skills that he could play running back. Now, obviously, you want to give him a shot at quarterback because the arm talent's there, man. It's really just about consistent accuracy and decision making that is Milroe's problem. Also, he's also one of those guys that gets himself in trouble as far as taking sacks because he is so athletic that he thinks he can get away from every sack, but he just can't do that, as we saw in Neyland, I will say. But this past season, but
safety in there,
yeah, exactly. But anyway, but I mean, again, that is an interesting topic though, because he is such a special runner, dude. And that's why I'm saying that he can make a difference on this football team right now, which makes him even more fascinating than all these other developmental quarterbacks that really aren't going to make an impact on the team immediately. Like they're going to sit behind a starter and try to develop their skills and eventually become a starter. But Miro is a fascinating case where he's also in that bucket, but he also can help the Seahawks win this next season. Going to be interested to see how they tap into that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating. I'm excited to see it. And one thing too that's really important with him as well is the character side.
Yes.
He's one of those guys that, unlike Shador, was one of the ones that everybody raved about. Like he had that story that's really cool where they were like, what are you working on, or what are your flaws? And he's like, how much time do you have? And then they were like, how do you not feel worried about telling us all this? And then he basically said, if somebody comes in here and doesn't tell you they have a lot of things they need to work on, they're lying to you and they're insulting you because that means they think you didn't watch the tape enough. And like that type of self-awareness exactly is crazy to have. And also means he's coachable. Like he is basically saying, I know I need help and I'm a bit of a project. So let's get there together. Like I'm willing to be that piece you can mold.
It's also his story is also interesting as well. That I love that story that you just told about the interview. But he also stayed at Alabama when Nick Saban left. Man, I mean, a lot of guys jump ship, and honestly, a lot of guys jump ship, and it helped their career. So that's a fascinating part of it. He was loyal enough to stay at Alabama, and stay there despite Saban leaving and everything like that. So again, it just speaks to Milroe's character, and he is a great guy, man, and. It's even though he played for Alabama, it's a guy now that he's on the next level. I'll definitely be rooting for and interested to see how his development works out and how the Seahawks use him next season.
Absolutely. And I want to point out something bringing up the coaching change. I think his 2023 season statistically and everything was better.
Yeah.
Like he was better. And then the scheme changes, the new coach comes in and it's like he took a step back. So it's like, how much do you even blame that on him versus the scheme change? So something to think about, and I'm sure a lot of teams evaluated that, but basically getting him back to that 2023 version is what you would want to do. But yeah, I agree. We'll be rooting for him and curious to see how it kind of plays out for him for his career in the NFL. All right. Now tackling some of these other guys, Riley Mills, defensive tackle at Notre Dame, pretty productive and athletic guy, had 7.5 sacks last season. So adding some more depth along that defensive line that could use a little bit of help as well. Then they go an interesting pick, Torrey Horton, wide receiver out of Colorado State. Pretty solid value pick there. Pretty athletic receiver, 6'2", 196, ran a 4.41. So adding him there to continue to add some pieces to that offense that just lost DK Metcalf.
Yeah, love the Torrey Horton pick. Adding depth at wide receiver, like you said, really productive and solid athlete. Again, I think he's going to play, man. And 5th round pick, getting him offensive snaps that's really good for the 5th round. So love them drafting him. I thought that was one of their better picks.
Yeah, and then they go double up at tight end, take Robbie Oots out of Alabama. He's basically a blocking tight end. He had very minimal passing snaps, and he's really, but funny enough, he has no production, but he's actually pretty a decent athlete. So basically just a versatile, blocker for them. And then they take developmental guard Bryce Cavalou out of Kansas in the 6th round. And then one of the best value picks I think we'd agree on in the entire draft, Damian Martinez, running back out of Miami in the 7th round, pick 223.
I love the Damian Martinez pick, man. It's, another example of why you don't invest a lot in the running back position, because I think they got a starting caliber running back potentially on the next level in the 7th round. A guy that I saw consistently mocked in the 4th, 5th round on a consistent basis. So fascinating that he fell all the way to the 7th. Productive college player, and I think obviously they're set at their starter with Kenneth Walker, but I think Damian Martinez will find himself in that rotation at some point.
Another one of those guys, 3 years somewhere, was at Oregon State, transferred to Miami. He's 6 foot 232, due to kind of a bowling ball, and PFF Big Board we've referenced, he was 80th on it and goes at 223, which is kind of crazy. And with a running back depth chart that Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet are on, they haven't been the most reliable from a health perspective. So I would be shocked if Martinez didn't find his way into a good amount of carries in his rookie season, one way or another. And then they wrap their class up with a couple more offensive players, Mason Rickman, tackle at Iowa, and then Ricky White, the 3rd wide receiver out of UNLV. Solid guy, one of those other guys that didn't test well, kind of in that Tez Johnson world where didn't test well for their size, but was a very productive receiver. Not at the Power 5 level, but at the level he was at. He started at Michigan State, transferred out, but was really productive at UNLV the couple years he was starting there. And was also Special Teams Player of the Year.
Oh,
It's
wow.
worth noting. So
There
could
you
be
go.
that at the very least. Yeah.
Yeah, probably going to be a special teams guy.
And their UDFAs, I don't think anybody. They signed a bunch of edge guys. Oh, yeah, one does stand out. Jared Ivey.
Oh, yeah.
The other edge rusher out of Ole Miss, a guy that I think a lot of people are surprised when undrafted.
I am very surprised Jared Ivey went undrafted. That could be an extremely impactful UDFA.
Absolutely. Yeah. What was your favorite pick for the Seattle Seahawks?
I'm gonna go Damian Martinez in the 7th round, man.
All right.
There's not much better value than that, I feel like, in this draft. So loved that pick for them.
Thought you were gonna go Milroe. Thought you were gonna go QB.
I thought about Milroe, but as a Vols fan, it's pretty tough to go an Alabama player, brother.
Bias getting in the way.
It is.
I'm gonna go, even though they trade, man, I don't know. I love the Gray Zabel fit and pick. I'm gonna honorary mention that, but I just love the value in the fit too for Nick Emmanwori in the 2nd round. Traded up for him, but they had so many draft picks and still had another 2nd that it didn't matter. And he fits. Can't wait to see what Mike McDonald does with him. But shout out Gray Zabel because Schneider did it, and I think it was a good pick, and I think he's gonna immediately be an impact player for the Seahawks. So. All right, what does the consensus say about the Seahawks?
3rd overall in the entire NFL.
Wow.
Pretty surprising, but I don't necessarily disagree with it, man. I think they got a lot of guys. They drafted in volume for one, and they got a lot of good value as far as the consensus is concerned. And I think everybody's also looking at the Milroe pick and saying how that's pretty intriguing, man. Especially considering I don't know, out of this class of quarterbacks that has so many question marks, you take a guy like Tyler Shuck at 40th overall and Jackson Dart, who aren't crazy, weren't very much more productive than Milroe. But Milroe can make an impact right now. I don't know. I think people are looking at this draft and are intrigued by it, and they got a lot of good value. So I like it.
I agree with that. They hit on a lot of guys with good value and fitting some needs they had and gaps and depth. And then, I completely agree on the Milroe front that from a process perspective with the quarterback position, I like that more than what other teams did.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So that is the Seahawks 2025 class. And that is also a wrap.
That's it, man.
The 2025 NFL draft review. We have now hit all 8 divisions, all 32 teams. Appreciate everybody for the ride, for whoever, if you tuned into all of these and check them out, or if you just listen to this one and watch it, appreciate that as well. Please like, subscribe, follow, share with your friends, leave comments, trash us, compliment what we did well. We want all the feedback.
We do.
Appreciate everybody so much for tuning into all these. And we'll be starting some other content now as we go into the off season. So until then,
thanks for talking ball with us.